This painting is arguably among the 10 most famous artworks in the world. The Birth of Venus was painted around 1485 by Sandro Botticelli, showing how the Roman goddess of love, beauty, sex, fertility, prosperity and desire is born from the sea as a mature woman. Her facial expression is peaceful and innocent, and she tries to conceal herself with her hair and arms. In this video, I'll discuss 10 fun facts about this painting that you may not be aware of. The theme of this painting is inspired by the poet Ovid's Metamorphoses, which consists of 15 books and 240 myths starting from the creation of the world until the deification of Julius Caesar. Ovid, perhaps better known as Homer, writes in his work about an adult Venus who is rising from the sea to inspire love on earth. The Roman goddess Venus is derived from the Greek goddess Aphrodite. The Latin word for Venus means something like love, charm and desire, very much in line with the things she is most associated with as a goddess. But for this painting, the Greek name may be more informative, as Aphrodite means arisen from foam, directly referring to her birth story. According to the myth, the Greek god Cronus castrated the god Uranus and threw his genitals into the sea. Aphrodite was later born from the foam of his genitals. Venus is not alone in this painting. But do you know who the others are? On the left is Zephyr, the god of the west wind, and you can see how he blows Venus to the shore. Meanwhile, Zephyr is carrying the nymph Chloris. They are surrounded by flowers which are falling from the sky. On the right is Hora, one of the goddesses of the seasons, handing a flowered cloak to Venus to cover herself. However, some people identify her as Flora instead, the goddess of spring. Before he painted this work, Botticelli was in love with a stunningly beautiful woman named Simonetta Vespucci. The problem was that she was already married to Marco Vespucci. Simonetta was known as the most beautiful woman alive, but she died young, about 9 years before Botticelli completed his painting. Botticelli would never marry in his life, and Simonetta would be his muse and inspiration. She served as the inspiration for Venus here, and you may recognize her in some of Botticelli's other paintings, like La Primavera, Venus and Mars, The Calumny of Apelles, and Pallas and the Centaur. But the goddess of the seasons on the right also looks a lot like Venus. Botticelli's earlier masterpiece La Primavera contains over 170 different flowers, several of them with symbolic meanings, and the flowers in this painting are also not randomly chosen. The flowers blowing in the wind are violets, which symbolize love. The dress of Hora and the robe she is holding for Venus are decorated with various spring flowers related to the birth theme, including red and white daisies, blue cornflowers, and yellow primroses. And the shell represents feminism. If you look at Venus in some more detail, you may notice a couple of odd things about her body. Now, of course, it shows a mythological story about a goddess, so I suppose everything is possible. But in terms of the proportions of her body, her neck, left shoulder and left arm are longer than you would expect. It's not that Botticelli made a mistake here though, as he included these elongations on purpose as they were considered a form of beauty. Another thing to notice is the position of Venus. If she were standing on the shell, she would be completely off balance. Instead, Venus is gently floating, explaining why the positioning of her feet and body is physically unrealistic. The first impression of many viewers is that Venus is standing on the shell, but obviously this is not a necessary requirement for a goddess. The rest of her pose and the way she covers herself are very much inspired by Greek statues made of her. You can see the similarity to the positioning of the arms in the statue of Venus de Medici, which is, like Botticelli's work, on display in the Uffizi Museum. And it may be good to say that the positioning of her long hair and hands also helped to cover up some of her nakedness, something that was still important at a time when most paintings were of religious nature. During a time that many artists started to make the switch from tempera painting to oil painting, Sandro Botticelli would still paint in tempera, a type of paint that consists of colored pigments mixed with a water-soluble binder, usually egg yolk. And even later in his life, Botticelli would never make the switch to oil paint. But he innovated in some different ways. This painting measures some 6 by 9 feet, and it is considered to be the first large-scale panel painting from Florence. And before this work, panel painting in Tuscany would be painted on wood panels, but this work is the first one from that region on canvas. Interestingly, canvas was considered a cheaper alternative than wood, and this implied that this painting was not intended to be displayed in public, but rather in someone's private residence. Over the years, many people have noted the cadaverous color of Venus, which is not considered very attractive by many. This was not some macabre fantasy of Botticelli, but merely a consequence of the discoloration of the pigment over time, even though the use of tempera is known to deteriorate much slower than, for example, watercolor and oil paint. Finally, Botticelli was neither the first nor the last to depict the story of the birth of Venus, but without doubt he created the most popular artwork on this topic. Here's for example a mural from the 1st or 2nd century BC discovered in Pompeii, showing Venus wringing her hair. And in the centuries after Botticelli's masterpiece, many other artists followed in his footsteps. Here is an 18th century variation by Jean-Honoré Fragonard, and versions by Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres and Eduard Steinbruck from the middle of the 19th century. One of the more famous versions of the birth of Venus was painted by Alexandre Cabanel in 1863. And here are some works from the second half of the 19th century by William Adolphe Bouguereau, Arnold Böcklin, Walter Crane, Henri Gervais, and Fritz Zuberbühler. I am curious to hear from you in the comment section down below which, if any, of these versions you prefer over the birth of Venus by Botticelli. Well, I hope you learned some new things about the birth of Venus by Sandro Botticelli. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe to see more art videos on this channel. Thanks for watching.